This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. A happy and joyous Easter to you. He has risen. This is the Roger Stone Show, and I'm your genial host, Roger Stone. And, well, for the next 2 hours, we're going to be talking news, politics, history, style, and, of course, food. So don't touch that dial. We're right here at 770 on the AM dial in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, but you can always listen to us worldwide, actually in 173 countries worldwide, by going to WABCRadio.com, or go on your cell phone right now and download the 77 WABC Radio app. That way you won't miss any of the amazing talk or entertainment programming we have here at 77 WABC. We are the crown jewel of AM radio. You know, the thing I love the most about Easter is the Easter parade. This is a tradition that started in 1870, and every Easter, celebrants don their very greatest and festive finery and show off their style along Fifth Avenue. This was immortalized by Irving Berlin, with a little help from Fred Astaire and Judy Garland in the famous movie Easter Parade. This pageant is a New York City tradition that stretches back, as I say, to the 1870s. So this morning, folks gathered at 10 a.m., and it usually continues right up until about now. The parade marches north on Fifth Avenue from 49th Street to 57th Street. The best place to watch was always St. Patrick's Cathedral. I'm sure it was today. And all you had to really do was dress up in your finest. And, of course, the ladies specifically are supposed to wear the millinery, a bonnet. In fact, it's actually formally called the Easter Parade and Bonnet Festival. Now, proper dress for men on Easter really is the swallowtail coat, striped trousers, a double-breasted waistcoat, a so-called wedding tie, and yes, the coolest part, a top hat. Of course, my wife said if I wore that get-up to church this morning, well, she wouldn't sit with me. But that is actually the proper outfit, not only for the Easter parade, but for a presidential inauguration. This is one of the great traditions that's going by the wayside, and it's really a tragedy. This is the outfit that John F. Kennedy wore. It's the outfit that Richard Nixon wore. Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, they all wore it. Even Bill Clinton wore it. It's not white tie. This is a little different, but it is the traditional diplomatic garb. Actually, a tailor will tell you that the swallowtail coat is the single most flattering cut of jacket for a gentleman because it used close to the body. I posted pictures of it today on Twitter, formerly now known as X. This is what you're actually supposed to wear. Then in 1988, George Bush, well, he wore a dark blue suit to his inauguration, and this great tradition ended. When I wore the traditional morning suit, as it's called, to Donald Trump's inauguration in 2016, People said I looked like a Batman villain. Some even said I looked like the Penguin himself. It's amazing how people don't understand tradition, and this is a great tradition. Now that I think about it, sometimes people shock me with what they wear to church. I'm not saying that everyone should dress like me. I mean, I have my own distinctive style, whether you like it, whether you don't. But flip-flops and a T-shirt, I don't think they're right for church or synagogue. But it has to do with the entire dumbing down of the country, a lack of respect for institutions, and a new informality that, well, I just don't like. But you don't come here to talk about clothes so much or style. You come to talk about politics. Indeed, there is a new danger to the potential of a Trump presidency. Here's how Trump could very well be barred from the 2024 elections. Now, you may have noticed that Republicans are very close to losing their lead in the U.S. House of Representatives. This worry actually gets bigger with recent news that Congressman Mike Gallagher is stepping down on April 19th. After he leaves, Republicans will barely have more members than Democrats. Let me explain why this is particularly important. First, there's 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. A party needs, therefore, at least 218 members to control the House. What's the situation in the House now? Well, with the resignation of Ken Buck of Colorado, Republicans currently have 218 members. After Mr. Gallagher of Wisconsin leaves, they will have 217. That's the bare minimum to control the House. There's going to be a special election to fill one vacancy. That's on April 30th. That seat will likely go to a Democrat. So by the end of April, the Republicans will have 217 members, and the Democrats will have 214 members. Now, it seems like Republicans have a slight edge with three more members who are Democrats than Republicans, but 217 plus 214 is 431, not 435. That means the Republicans need 217 votes to get anything done. That kind of shows how important it is that all Republicans stick together, which they seem quite candidly to have no tendency to do. Traditionally, there's a subgroup of Republicans who don't support the overall plans of the party caucus. But here's the bad news for Republicans. Congressman Mike Gallagher is leaving. He's announced his resignation, but he has not resigned. You see, if he resigned right now, today, or tomorrow, there would still be time to have a quick special election to replace him. But by resigning later, waiting until after state law mandates a special election to fill the seat, that would be resigning by the second Tuesday in April, there'll be no special election, and his seat will remain vacant. The good news may be for the Republicans that there are three special elections in May and June to fill some of those other empty seats. That could help them a bit. But this will only help until June. If Republicans don't stay united at that point, and even one or two Republican members decide to retire, well, then Democrats take over the House. They would immediately elect Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of the House. Here's why that's important, because immediately the Democrats would pass legislation by the odious Congressman Jamie Raskin to declare that President Donald Trump had participated in an insurrection and therefore was ineligible to be on the ballot. The Democrats would immediately follow suit, where they control the Senate 51-49. Now, you may say, well, the courts would never allow that. Actually, anyone who read the recent U.S. Supreme Court Colorado decision knows that the court actually specifically invited this. That's right. The court said that while the states cannot bar the Trump from being on the ballot in the individual states, the Congress could do so. And then almost immediately, Jamie Raskin introduced his legislation. So who is behind this? Because you see, I think there's actually a nefarious, insidious plot that is being financed by the vulture capitalist Paul Singer, and I think it's being run, strategized, implemented by former Speaker Kevin McCarthy in a revenge play. If you look at those congressmen who have resigned, the one thing they all seem to have in common is enormous campaign contributions from Mr. Singer. So I fear that this effort to pick off Republicans one by one so that the precarious Republican majority is lost is going to continue right up until November. So I began to examine what members of the 117th Congress, based on their age, the time they came to Congress, and whether or not they had endorsed Donald Trump, to determine who the next Rhino Quislings might be. Here are my nominees. Ken Calvert, Republican of California, first elected in 1992. He's 71 years old. Took $5,800 from Paul Singer. Joe Wilson, Republican of South Carolina, first elected in 2001 in a special election. 77 years old. I think he is a likely retiree. Mike Rogers of Alabama. He's only 66, but he also took $5,800 from Paul Singer. Then there is Virginia Fox. She was first elected in 2004. She's 81 years old. She actually previously announced her intention to retire, only to reluctantly stand for election again. And that is just my first cut of those who might go over the side. And then, of course, there is Congressman Pence, who is the brother of Mike Pence. We know that there's no good blood there. So Mike Congressman Pence, who is was elected to the House with the endorsement of Donald Trump. Perhaps he will be the Quisling who stabs Donald Trump in the back. This is a very, very real danger, folks, one that we have to pay attention to. I put together and compiled a broader list of those who might be in on the fix. You can find it all at stonezone.com. But Greg Pence, Vice President's brother, the Vice President's Mike Pence's brother, I think he may be the next to go. What further juxtaposition could we have in American politics than the scene on Thursday when President Donald Trump was attending a wake for New York police officer Jonathan Diller. At the same time, former Presidents Obama, Biden, and Clinton were at a high-dollar fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall, which featured a performance by Lizzo. What impressed me about this event in the perhaps the most liberal city in the country, second only maybe to San Francisco, were the very large and very loud pro-Palestinian, anti-Biden demonstrations. The streets were thick with demonstrators, and they all seemed to be chanting about Genocide Joe. I think this is a very real danger for the Democratic Party. So those who celebrated that Supreme Court decision, they need to understand that if I'm right, and the House should flip to the Democrats, and both houses pass resolutions to prevent Trump from running again, barring him from the ballot, if you're saying to yourself, well, surely the courts would never allow that, no, my friends, the action I described to you is actually invited by the Supreme Court themselves. Go back and read it. They said that the Congress had the authority to bar Trump from the ballot. Now, this is only one of the many plans to stop Trump. First, there was, of course, the effort in the states that ended up going to the Supreme Court to bar him from the ballot based on this false narrative, the false assertion that Trump had participated in an insurrection and was therefore ineligible. There were two problems with that. Fortunately, the Supreme Court found both of them. One, there is no court in the land who has convicted Trump of insurrection. And secondarily, Article 14, Section 3 of the Constitution that was cited in all these legal actions very specifically does not pertain to the President or the Vice President of the United States. It pertains to officers of the U.S. government, and the Supreme Court has elsewhere defined officers as those who are in appointed office rather than in elective office. But there's a much, much more insidious plan to remove Donald Trump. It's called the Transition Integrity Project. We now know that it was in place in 2020, where it was quite successful. And they're at it again, folks. They're going to try it again. Ed Martin, of the Eagle Forum, a very popular radio talk show host, is going to join us today to talk about this mysterious Transition Integrity Project and how, once again, they intend to stop Trump from returning to the White House. Folks, when I tell you about this and when our guest Ed Martin lays it out for you, I tell you it will curl your hair. A lot of people asking what really happened to the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. It's interesting that the collapse of that bridge was essentially previewed in the recent movie by Netflix. It was produced by none other than Barack and Michelle Obama. A lot of legitimate questions at play there. Jack Posobiec of Human Events, one of the most influential young conservatives in the country today, with over 2 million listeners, who has a extensive background in intelligence, is going to join us to talk about that. He is a veteran U.S. Navy officer who had deployments both at Guantanamo Bay and East Asia. He's got some shocking observations about that. And then, of course, the trial of Donald Trump in New York City, which is now scheduled for April 15th, is the hush money trial is first and foremost in the news. Judge Juan Merchan has refused to recuse himself, even though he got caught giving a campaign contribution to Joe Biden in violation of the judicial canon of ethics. Now comes word that Judge Merchan's daughter actually attacked President Donald Trump on her page on X, formerly known as Twitter, actually posting graphics that show President Donald Trump behind bars. Lauren Merchan is a Democratic political operative and consultant who has been paid literally hundreds of thousands of dollars by the Biden campaign. Now, there's an elaborate effort by Katie Fang of the media and others to claim that the Twitter profile, the profile on X, is not the judge's. But Laura Loomer, the investigative reporter, has the receipts, as they say. It is going to be explored today on the Roger Stone Show when Mike Davis, former chief counsel of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, will join us to break all of this down. I'm Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show. Stand by, because we've got a lot more.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. This is the Roger Stone Show. We were talking about the upcoming trial in Manhattan where District Attorney Alvin Bragg is about on April 15th to bring Donald Trump to trial based on, well, it's kind of hard to say. I'm not really sure what the crime here is. It is alleged that Donald Trump funded payments through Michael Cohen, his former attorney, to the adult movie star Stormy Daniels. Daniels has denied this in writing after then changing her tune. Cohen has denied this in sworn testimony and in writing and in conversations with his former lawyer, Robert Costello. But last week, the judge ruled that even though Cohen had waived the privilege of Mr. Costello will not be allowed to testify at the trial. Wow, isn't that strange? Then Michael Avenatti, you remember him, he was Stormy Daniels' lawyer. He's come forward to say that, no, actually the person having an affair with Stormy Daniels wasn't Donald Trump, it was Michael Cohen himself, and that the payments to Daniels were intended to keep her silent, not about Trump, but about Cohen. Now, Mr. Avenatti is in prison, having been convicted of stealing money from his clients, so it is unclear how effective a witness he would be, but that's if the judge would even let him testify. Now the judge has ruled that Trump's lawyers can't even file any motion without his approval because the trial is only 2 weeks away. This doesn't seem very fair, considering that the government withheld from Trump's lawyers thousands and thousands of documents collected by federal prosecutors when they reviewed this case and decided to bring no charges. I really think the American people are seeing through this, but it's going to be interesting to see how the gag order that has been put on Trump will affect this particular trial, or more precisely, affect public opinion surrounding this trial. You see, in the valuations trial, Trump was allowed to step out in the hallway or hold a press conference or a press briefing when the court was on recess or at the end of the day, and he was very effective on putting through the point to the American people that this was a trial with no victims, that Donald Trump borrowed money from banks, he put up collateral, those banks conducted their own independent appraisal of the value of that collateral, they made loans, and they all got paid back. In fact, they made $40 million. No victim, no crime. I really do think the American people are seeing through this. Meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy announced with much fanfare his choice for vice president. It is surprising. A woman named Nicole Shanahan, whose only claim to fame seems to be that she's extraordinarily wealthy. Nicole Shanahan is the ex-wife of Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, and evidently Ms. Shanahan, who is a progressive Democrat who actually gave money to Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, a woman who is proudly says that she's vaccinated and boosted, thus contradicting the central tenet, the very theme of health freedom of Robert Kennedy's campaign. Why would Mr. Kennedy choose someone who is seemingly so unqualified? Well, here's why. He needs $50 million to get on the ballot. As we've talked about on the Stone Show here many, many times, getting on the ballot is a labor-intensive, arcane, difficult process. What this tells me is that it's not going well. Robert Kennedy used to say it would cost his campaign $20 million. I now notice he's saying that it will cost them $50 million. Where could he get $50 million? I would say he could get it from Ms. Shanahan. So Robert Kennedy, the man who says he doesn't sell out to special interests, I think he just sold out to a special interest. In terms of the larger picture, however, if you were a Trump supporter and maybe were wavering or thinking about voting for RFK, now that he has a hardcore progressive leftist as his vice presidential running mate, well, I think you're going to stop thinking about voting for Robert Kennedy. We've got a lot more to talk to you about today. Thanks for tuning in to the Roger Stone Show. And as the great Jackie Gleason would say, away we go.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on this beautiful Easter Sunday. Joe Biden and the Democrats are clearly signaling that one of their core narratives for the 2024 election is that Joe Biden is running to defend American democracy against what Biden argues is the existential threat to democracy posed by Donald Trump and his MAGA supporters. I guess that's me he's talking about. But it is actually the activities of the Democrats in the 2020 Transition Integrity Project that provide the most abundant and unambiguous evidence that looks like it is the Democrats themselves who are the real threat to American democracy, or more precisely, to our constitutional republic. Here to talk about this is Ed Martin. Ed Martin is the president of Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles and the Eagle Forum Education and Legal Defense Fund. He was personally selected by Phyllis Schlafly, an old friend of mine, to succeed her in both of those roles. He's an attorney with advanced degrees in medical ethics and philosophy. He has served as both chairman of the the Missouri Republican Party, as well as serving as the Republican National Committee man from Missouri. He was chief of staff to Missouri Governor Matt Blunt. He ran himself for Missouri Attorney General. He is the co-author of the 2016 New York Times best-selling book, The Conservative Case for Trump. And he is with the Salem Radio Network, where he can be heard nightly at 11 p.m. He also has turned his show into an epically successful podcast. Ed, there's a lot to digest here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us on the Roger Stone Show.
Well, thank you, Roger. And I recall very vividly in the midst of one of the times they were persecuting you, that you and I and your lovely wife and my family went down to Mass in Washington, D.C., and then my sons still talk about it. It was a great chance for them to meet you. But a point of personal privilege, Roger, I have to tell you, this week I was thinking of you because I don't know if you remember this story. I was offered a contract by CNN, and the first thing I did after I asked my wife what she thought is I called Roger Stone. And I said, Roger, what do you think I should do? Should I take it at CNN? And he said, of course, take it and plan on your firing. And it went exactly as you said. I took it. I lasted about 3 months, and then Anna Navarro and April Ryan and Simone Sanders went to management, kind of like what they did to Ronna McDaniel at MSNBC or NBC, and they said, we won't be on this station if you don't get rid of Martin. And I was fired. So there you go. You were right as usual, but it was one that I don't know if I've reminded you that you were right on. So thank you for that, and thanks for the chance to talk about. You're exactly right. Whenever the Democrats accuse us, we the people, of doing something, it's them that are doing it. And so they're talking about threat to democracy. We now have a trail from 2020 in the summer all the way down to last month, February 2024, of conduct by Democrats at the highest levels to undermine our Constitution, to subvert democracy. And they're doing it right in the faces of the country. And thankfully, some people are really pushing now to get to the bottom of it. But it's an extraordinary tale of a coup on America that's being executed, and it continues to be done today. A color revolution led against we the people in America right now.
Let me just say a quick word about your CNN experience, because I found this kind of amusing. So, look, I'm not a great fan of Ronna Romney McDaniel, not at all.
Right.
But when she joined MSNBC and NBC, Chuck Todd, who frankly I think belongs behind the counter at Macy's rather than as the host of Meet the Press, let's just say Tim Russert, he is not. He went out and had a literal on-air meltdown fit. Now, when MSNBC hired Jen Psaki, I don't remember him complaining. He's supposed to be an unbiased neutral journalists. So when these networks hire high-profile Democrats, the revolving door coming out of the White House and going right over to MSNBC, Chuckles Todd had no problem whatsoever with that, but he has a problem with a putative Republican joining the network. I think you call that hypocrisy. Okay, had to get that off my chest.
Right. No, you're exactly right, and I agree. But back to the hypocrisy of what's going on. Started, as I mentioned, we now know August of 2020 all the way through today. This Democrat plot, and conduct against us in this country.
So outline for us, if you would, what they're working on and what they have planned. What's interesting to me is that during the so-called Russian collusion hoax, which we now know was a hoax, perhaps the greatest single dirty trick in American political history, certainly the greatest single abuse of power, where the Obama administration, including Joe Biden himself, and President Barack Obama, National Security Director Susan Rice, FBI Director James Comey, CIA Director John Brennan, used what they absolutely knew was falsified evidence, the so-called Steele dossier, which was a report that claimed falsely that Donald Trump had cavorted with prostitutes in Moscow when he was a private citizen and actually watched them urinate on a bed that in a hotel where Barack Obama had once stayed. The whole thing turned out to be fiction, and they knew it, but they used it to justify FISA warrants and spying on Trump's campaign. They used it to justify the appointment of a special counsel, but it was all secretive. It was all behind the scenes. What we're seeing here, what you're going to outline for us today, these folks are doing it right out in the open. The arrogance of it is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and they're bragging about it, right? And so let me draw a through line here. Right after President Trump takes office in 2017, one of the senior Obama Department of Defense officials, her name is Rosa Brooks, she leaves office and she writes a column. And the column says, we got to stop Trump. We got to do it by this and that. And by the way, if none of that works, we should do a military coup. She writes it. And I think it was Newsweek or one of these things. And then she goes off to Georgetown, where she still sits today as a dean of Georgetown Law School, a school that gets hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government and gets 501c3 status. She sits there and she's running this web of conduct. So in 2020, there's something called the Transition Integrity Project, where they war game what to do at the 2020 election. And they talk about all the things that could happen. It's like a lesson in the CIA's Color Revolution course on what we did in other countries. And they're talking, and they even use words like, as they get to, they may have to have alternate electors. They use the word agent provocateurs, which is clearly something that happened on January 6th. Now that we see more of what's coming out. And again, as you point out, John Podesta's on there, David Frum is on there. It's the coalition of anti-Trumpers, and they're public. They do interviews about it. There's retired military guys who are getting their pension and their military benefits who are out doing this thing, and it looks a lot like a real attempted coup. We haven't uncovered all of it, but we do know that Molly Ball's famous piece that she wrote, where they talk about fortifying the election, the Democrats were using every tool. They say they didn't break the law, but they certainly broke every ethical and moral norm and constitutional expectation. But that's all interesting, Roger. It's hard to look backwards in politics. If you're looking back too long, you're not looking at the train that's coming at you. But last month in February, they're bragging about, there's a general that's bragging about that they're wargaming how to stop the takeover, the commander-in-chief, a civilian commander-in-chief, stop the constitutional accurate takeover of a new leader by if needed, changing the Constitution to make sure that the military can control itself, not be controlled by a new President Trump. So we're watching this through line, and it's all, again, Georgetown University, Dean Rosa Brooks, a woman named Mary McCord, who was in the middle of the Russia debacle. She's at the Department of Justice. And so what we have now, thankfully, guys like Taibbi McCabe, DeRoy Murdoch journalists have been digging into it, and now the Congress is paying attention. So we've got to get to the bottom of it, not because it's scummy behavior, but because they've shown that they can actually succeed at stopping Trump, and we've got to be fighting back.
Yeah, earlier in the show, I outlined what I think is this effort to try to tip control of the House of Representatives to the Democrats by inducing enough Republicans to throw in the towel and vacate their seats, creating enough votes for Hakeem Jeffries to become Speaker, where they will quickly pass legislation barring Donald Trump from the ballot. I think that would get rubber stamped over in the Senate, 51-49. And for our friends out there who are listening, say, well, surely the courts will never allow that. Actually, as you know, Ed, the Supreme Court invited that in their Colorado ballot access decision. They specifically said only the Congress would have the power to bar an individual from the ballot. What you're talking about, I think, is a secondary danger, but just as insidious. The centerpiece of this seems to be legislation by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. You remember him, the great Vietnam War veteran.
Right, exactly.
Shout out to all my fellow Connecticut natives out there. He's actually sponsored legislation that would, in essence, remove the president's control of the military. In other words, remove civilian control of the military and put it in the hands of the military themselves. I can't think of anything that is more anti-American.
Well, and look, again, we see now, looking back a little bit, General Milley is bragging about the fact that he was resisting the Constitution. And, again, and deciding that he was above the Constitution and all these. But what I'm pointing to, Roger, you've taught so many of us over the years. You've got to find where the enemy is, and you've got to isolate and attack what they're doing. Georgetown University School of Law is a center of this right now. It's just a few blocks from the Capitol. You mentioned a revolving door. It's got a revolving door of people who come out of the Obama, especially Obama administration, and now to some extent Biden administration. It's where Podesta hung his hat for a while, John Podesta, and on and on and on. And exactly, there's a series of efforts, one on the military control, other ones on aspects of any kind of handoff. And, of course, as you point out, the lawfare is aimed at people, like they've done to you for a decade now, like they're doing to President Trump. Use the law against individuals anywhere you can, whether it's now Jeff Barr or John Eastman. So what we're talking about, and I've been working on it for a month and a half now, is trying to get people to see what's happening so we can demand some changes. And one of them should be, by the way, just like when Elise Stefanik put those Ivy League presidents on the hot seat, Georgetown University ought to answer some questions now. I mean, you can run stupid professors saying dumb things. That's America. That's the First Amendment. I'm all for that. You cannot run operatives with a Secret Service, with top secret clearance and military guys. There's retired military in there talking about this. You can't run that and think you get tax dollars and benefits from the government. By the way, Congressman Pete Sessions, 5 days ago, sent a letter over to Georgetown saying, stop the shredder, save the documents, because we want to look at what the heck you were doing. And so, I'm not a huge fan of these oversight things because they don't usually yield much. On the other hand, we need a death by 1,000 cuts. If we've learned anything from the left, you've got to take every shot you can and keep moving. And I really think Georgetown University has to answer for what they're doing, because to me, it's treasonous. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not saying I see all the elements to try somebody and put them to death, but I'm seeing conduct that is far beyond what is a university's having interesting conversations about possibilities.
So the one person who seems to be the common thread here, up to her knees in the Russian collusion hoax, up to her knees in impeachment number 1, based on the non-Russian collusion that didn't exist, up to her knees in impeachment number 2, the Ukrainian phone call, which, as President Trump says, was perfect, We actually now know that impeachment was actually designed to cover up Joe Biden's own misconduct regarding himself and his son pertaining to Ukraine. Also involved in the January 6th controversy is this woman, Mary McCord, who's, I guess, back at Georgetown. Tell us about Mary McCord.
Well, I'll tell you a story that will illustrate this. I was actually with a guy who's a defense lawyer. He's done a lot of different work, and I only just met him. And we're talking with somebody else in the conversation, and he says, the problem with the FBI is the FBI used to be, if you were carrying a gun as an FBI agent, you had to talk to a prosecutor, and you had to work a case together. You couldn't just be off. What happened with guys like Strzok, Peter Strzok, and all these people is they went into this counterintelligence where they didn't have to talk to anybody. And Mary McCord at the Department of Justice was the head of the counterintelligence, the national security desk there. And so she had total control to do things like say, hey, wow, look at this. We think we're worried about X or Y. Go ask the Five Eyes, the other nations, to bump these guys, they call it. And unsolicited, this guy who I'd never met said, the woman who is the worst at this is Mary McCord. She's totally undermining the Department of Justice and the whole system of government the way it's supposed to be. So she was at the Department of Justice. She's been at the center, as you point out, of all of the abuses you can think of. The FISA overuse, the use of government without any kind of accountability, and very, very, very politically, aimed. She's not just a liberal. She's a card-carrying Democrat who's going after everybody. And as you point out, she cycles out of government and goes where? Georgetown Law, to a special institute, peopled with another 6 lawyers that are just the same as her, hacks from the left and the Democrats, and they're in there doing war gaming over how to take over the government. And nobody in the Georgetown Law is saying, hey, this is a little different than when we have some egghead who got his PhD at Oxford who's talking about what would it be like if the Roman Empire restarted. These are people who know how to use the power to impact things. And of course, she's quoted in NBC News delivering the message of the regime and all the time now. And so we can see hand in glove it's working together. And as I said, just February, a month ago, they had one of these war games with with retired military, with all these different entities on a Zoom call, which means it's recorded somewhere, and we should get it. We should get the video and see how they were game planning to stop the peaceful transition of government. That's what their stated goal is. We hate Trump so much, we must subvert the Constitution and do this. So Mary McCord has a lot to answer for her previous conduct. I agree. But right now, she's in the middle of leading what it looks to me like a coup against our nation. If we can stop it, it'll be the dog that didn't bark. But right now, the dog's barking, and we better listen.
Yeah, I was shocked to hear those revelations that John Brennan, the CIA director, with no probable cause, and in order to maintain his own plausible deniability, went to the intelligence agencies of the 5 English-speaking nations, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, to ask them to begin to surveil 26 associates of Donald Trump, of whom I was one. I woke up on Inauguration Day, which would have been January 20 of 2017, to read an above-the-fold story in the New York Times saying that I was one of 3 Trump associates who was under government surveillance, and actually used the word wiretapped, who was wiretapped because of my connections to Russia, of which I had and have none. To this day, by the way, the government denies that, but the New York Times refuses to retract it because they say they have 3 impeccable sources. Pardon me, but this appears to be deja vu all over again.
Well, and deja vu, or they're running this. Yes, they're running the same play, and they know how to run it. And what you just revealed, what you just talked about, has been revealed, is what we know. Lord knows what we don't know. In other words, how many things did they engineer? And remember, when I tell you, Roger, your listeners will get it, but I tell you, hey, are you surprised that when America says to the other Five Eyes, the other big nations, Britain and Australia, hey, I need your help like this, they say we'll help? Of course they do, because they need America. Just like, by the way, when the Ukraine is told, Zelensky's told, and those guys are told, we're going to run it like this, this is how they run it. I mean, you don't have to like wonder now how you see the power politics. But back to Mary McCord, at the center of this, they're going to run. It's like when they try to run on race. There's no more racist party in the history of the country than the Democrat Party. Down to today, watch Charles Barkley, for God's sakes, on CNN admit the Democrats only talk about black people at election time. They don't care for them. So they're the racist party, and they say everyone else is racist. Now they're going to say they're for protecting democracy when all of them at the top level, including Biden, are spending their time subverting democracy in front of us. And the only good news is we can see it and we can say it, and we've got to fight back against it. But we also better be aware that they're not playing for small stakes, right? This is the free world, control of the greatest nation in the world, and they're playing at a high level. We better be aware of what they're doing because it's not slowing. They're not caught and therefore this Easter season we're repentant. No, they're not repentant. They're bolder than ever.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show, and I am interviewing Ed Martin, the host of the Pro-America Report on the Salem Radio Network, and we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
This is Roger Stone, and we're back. We're talking to Ed Martin, who is the president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles and Eagles Forum Education and Legal Defense Fund. He's an old friend of mine, going back to the days of one of our greatest presidents, Ronald Reagan. Ed served as chairman of the Missouri Republican Party as well as the Republican National Committee man for Missouri. He is the co-author of a 2016 New York Times best-selling book, The Conservative Case for Trump, and he currently hosts the Pro-America Report on the Salem Radio Network. We're glad to have you. Ed, let's get into some politics. Given everything that they have thrown at him, given the domination of Trump derangement syndrome in the national mainstream media, how do you think President Donald Trump is doing?
Well, I can only assess it, Roger, from where people I know. And I grew up not far. I listened to WABC growing up. I grew up in New Jersey, Jersey City, and then I spent 25 years in Missouri. And I think of those two populations, New Jersey and Missouri, especially St. Louis, that's very sort of pre-Trumpian America first, and people are just running through fire that supported the president. You can't keep them from voting. Now, that's important when you're running for office, and the late Phyllis Schlafly used to say one of the most important things she ever did was run for Congress and lose, because you learn how campaigns work. And I ran, as you mentioned, and I lost. You know how they work. Turnout, you got to turn your people out. If they're fired up, that makes it easier, right? So I think the president's got unbelievably strong turnout from Republicans, all Republicans, even the ones that may say they don't really like him. They're there. The question, I think, is a bigger one, and I think it's happening, is more and more Americans see that they're bullied. The word I use is bullied. They're bullied by the government, and they're seeing Trump, who's a billionaire, who's got the pretty wife, and he's got the great life. He's got the great friends. He's been successful, and they're bullying him. And more Americans are looking up, and they're saying, but I can't stand this. And I think black men are reacting to that. I think lots of other folks are reacting. I think a lot of women, they're liberal white women, will hate Trump because they're mentally ill. But the real normal women are looking at it going, this isn't how it's supposed to work. So I think it's going fine. But as you know, Roger, it comes down to 6 or 7 states. And the RNC takeover is important because you got to get on the ground. And you don't just got to get on the ground with Scott Presler, who I love, registering voters. You got to get on the ground with people that know how to fight. Lawyers, operatives who know where the game is played hard in Montgomery County, in Maricopa County. And so I'm optimistic, but, a lot of times the biggest fear I have is people start feeling good. And they're like, oh, we're on the right trend line. We got everything happening. No, you got to grind. It's a grind, and the grind is harder than ever.
I read this terrific report from the National Republican Assembly the other day. They have developed a proprietary and perfectly legal program in which you can run a state's entire voter database through their program and find bad addresses. And they're finding hundreds and hundreds of thousands of bad addresses. People registered to empty lots. People registered to buildings that don't exist. They then take them to the boards of elections, and in many, many states, they're getting cooperation. And these non-existent people living at non-existent addresses are being removed from the rolls. People don't see that happening, but I can assure you it's happening. We're going to have a report on it next weekend here at the Roger Stone Show, because it's extraordinarily impressive, and it proves, you know, what one individual can do, or a handful of individuals working together can do. Money continues to be an enormous problem for the Trump campaign. The president's efforts are being drained by this tsunami of lawfare. The Democrats, being incumbents, have raised record sums of money. I think that gap has to be closed. I think it was California Speaker Jess Unruh who said money is the mother's milk of politics. Can Trump close this gap with small and medium-sized contributions?
Well, yes, and I worry, right? Yes, finally having control of the RNC makes people that believe in Trump think, yes, they won't be wasted by Rana and others and consultants. So I think you'll see something there. But I think that, you know, it's a real challenge. And at the highest level, as you mentioned, the big donors, you know, that's where I hate to say it. One of the things about, you know, talk of Trump winning makes donors say, oh, boy, I better get on board. So, I look, if anybody can do that, it's Trump. He's shown that he can do it. And, look, if you're Biden, you better have twice as much money than Trump, because you need it to try to mask over what's going on. But we watched, you know, a few days ago, there was Obama and Clinton raising money for Biden. Again, if you feel good about the fact that the country's going to hell and we got a guy that can save it, Trump, you better realize the country's going to hell, and they don't mind taking it to hell, and they're not gonna let us, you know, get back in office easily. So it's going to be a dogfight. And I look, I hadn't given money to Trump in probably a year. And actually, after the primary was over, I went online and I gave some more money to him. You know, and I'm not a big donor type, but I think people have to change their mindset in terms of realizing, hey, whatever the heck the fight is, you know, Trump's got to fight lawsuits and everything else. He needs our support, and that is money. Money is you need votes and money. If you don't have money to get the votes, it's not going to work. So I'm with you on that.
All right. I think we're out of time for this segment. I want to thank Ed Martin, a longtime friend of mine who does a great pro-America show on the Salem Radio Network, for joining us here on the Roger Stone Show. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Roger. It's always a pleasure.
Folks, last week I gave out the recipe for pizzagena. Pizzagena is an Italian Easter pie. It's a much anticipated savory treat around Easter. It's a deep dish pie that includes cheese, eggs, maybe salami, a little mortadella. It's kind of like an Italian quiche. But a lot of people complained that I didn't give them enough advance notice to write it down. Well, it's Easter. So on the show today, I'm going to give you yet again my mother's, actually my Aunt Marie's, a famous recipe for pizzagena. So get your pen and pencil now, get it ready, because before the end of today's Roger Stone Show, we're going to give you the recipe for this delicious traditional Italian pie. I'm Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show. I would urge you one more time, go to the App Store right now and download the 77 WABC radio app so you don't miss any of the great programming here on the crown jewel of AM radio, 77 WABC. You're listening to the Roger Stone Show this Easter, and we'll be right back.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and you're tuned in to the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC Radio. If you're not in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, you can go to WABCRadio.com because we're live streaming in 173 countries worldwide, including anywhere in this great country. Joining me now is Jack Posobiec. He is the senior editor at Human Events and host of Human Events Daily, which has had more than 250 million downloads to date. He is a veteran U.S. Navy intelligence officer who served his country both at Guantanamo Bay and in East Asia. Jack, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Roger, it's an honor to be with you here on the day of the resurrection, the commemoration of Easter Sunday here, our Lord's rebirth, and, of course, the day that truly founded all of Christianity.
It was a great privilege for me to join you about a week ago at this great Catholics for Catholics event at Mar-a-Lago, where we had a prayer for President Donald Trump. We stood there with General Michael Flynn and many others. We actually said the rosary. It was a great, great event. I noticed how both of us were so openly and viciously mocked over it on social media.
Well, you know what, Roger, what can I say? I think there is something of a reawakening going on in America today when it comes to Christianity, where Christians are realizing that it's sort of like, I'm sure you remember or have seen that photo of New York City, the skyline on Good Friday in 1956, where the skyline was lit up with the three crosses of Calvary, the three crosses of Good Friday, a public display of Christianity honoring our central the religion that was the majority of Americans and has always been the majority of Americans. We've always been a Christian majority country. And the fact that this display does not happen, these open displays of Christianity do not happen anymore in the United States. It's because we've entered into this sort of realm where Christians are relegated to this passive, you go in your churches and be Christian, but don't bring any of that over here. And in the reawakening, people are starting to become actively Christian again, publicly Christian again, openly Christian again. So you know what? I take it as a badge of honor every time somebody mocks me for my faith and for practicing my faith and being proud of my faith publicly. Please mock me for saying the rosary, because I will continue to say it louder and in more prominent locations.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing I guess is missing is people don't seem to understand the very basic concept and precept of redemption. I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago. Nobody is. People change. Am I a sinner? You bet. Have I made enormous mistakes in my life? Name somebody who hasn't. As I said at that event, I was once one of the founders of Republicans for Choice. I, as a libertarian conservative, I kind of thought, well, the government shouldn't tell a woman what they can do with their body. But with the birth of my first great-grandson, roughly 5 years ago, coinciding with my the reaffirmation of my faith in Jesus Christ and my redemption in the blood of the cross, I changed my mind. And today I recognize that abortion is the taking of a human life. Other people may disagree. That's the great thing about America. You don't have to agree with me, but my views have changed. Don't throw in my face what I said 30 years ago. Look at what I believe today. People don't seem to understand that. Anyway,
Roger, where would the Bible be without redemption? Where would the Bible be without Peter, the leader of the apostles, who denied Christ 3 times? At the time of the crucifixion, during the passion itself? Where would we be if King David had not been redeemed after committing adultery and murder? And it goes on. If Saul had not been redeemed as Paul, and I could go on and on. The Bible is filled with stories of God redeeming those that he chooses to work through as his vessels. And in fact, I would submit that God redeems people and chooses people who have fallen so that their redemption might be a sign to others.
There's no question whatsoever that the Lord has many times worked through broken individuals. That is for certain. Anyway, there's a lot of questions about this horrific incident at the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. You were one of the first people on the scene. I watched on social media. You headed there as soon as you heard about it. People say, of course, it was an accident. Others are asking questions as to how could this possibly happen? Was this an act of terrorism? What's your take?
Well, Roger, here's what's interesting, and this one hits close for us, not only because of proximity. We only live about 30 minutes from that bridge. That's a bridge that my children and I go over on a regular basis, so often, in fact, that my kids even have a nickname for it. They call it the Dinosaur Bridge, or they used to call it the Dinosaur Bridge, and we rode over it every time that we went to Benji's Drive-In Movie Theater, which is a movie theater that's been open since 1956, by the way, the same year that the crosses were up in New York City, coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally. That's when America was its greatest. And this really hit home for our family. And so I went out there to try to find out what was going on. Couldn't get very close. We got some information, some more. But what's really interesting to me is that the authorities in Baltimore and the authorities in the federal government, they're not giving us the basic information about who was in charge of the pilotage of this vessel when all of this took place. Now, the way it works in every major harbor in the world and every major port is that a ship is not run by its own crew. It's not driven by its own crew. When a ship of that size pulls in, you would have someone come out from the local Harbor Pilots Association. This is unionized. And they will come out, meet the vessel both while entering and exiting port, inbound and outbound, and they will take control of the vessel and run the navigation and work with the ship's crew to get them through very situations like this. So that if you're going into a port like Baltimore or a port like Sri Lanka, where it was headed towards, I believe it was Colombo or possibly Trincomalee, or a port like Singapore or others, these major ports around the world, each of them has their own very specific set of characteristics, specific set of currents, of obstacles, challenges, and of course, a major bridge is going to be any function of that. And so there's a lot of questions that remain here about why we don't know who the pilot of this bridge was, because even before it strikes the bridge, if you look at the chart, if you look at the track of the motor vessel Dali, it's already out of the channel, even at the point where it loses electricity. So there were problems that were going on with the ship even before it lost power. There were issues happening already. Why was that ship brought out of its berthing if these problems were already occurring? And why was it ever put out to sea in such a way? There's no question that this should have been delayed, and all of these things should have been checked out while it was still dockside, while it was still pierside in its berth. Not only is it a massive systemic failure, but it also raises a lot of questions about whether or not, now people have said, could this have been a cyber attack? Could this have been the Russians as potentially some kind of reciprocity for U.S. involvement in what they claim is U.S. involvement in the Moscow terror attack? Could this have been the Chinese? Could have been the Iranians? Could have been some third non-state actor, et cetera? The question is, we don't have good answers from the Biden administration as to what cybersecurity implementations are currently in place to prevent such a thing from happening. And I'll say this as a prior Navy intelligence officer, that this was the exact type of way that we focused on protecting Navy ships and also going on offense against adversary navies to attempt to take over their ships. Look, Roger, you wouldn't try to target the missile systems or the launch capacities of these vessels. What you would do is you would target the operational systems. You would target the rudder. You would target the power. You would target the diesel generator. You would target the motors. You would target the rudder. That is the best way to render a ship of the line, a military vessel, ineffective or neutralized in any capacity. And go talk to the Naval War College up in Newport, Rhode Island. They'll tell you that's exactly what the current U.S. Navy is worried about should there be any at-sea conflagration with the People's Liberation Army Navy, the Chinese Navy, because they know that's exactly what would start happening. So the questions are, obviously we don't know yet whether or not this was a cyber attack, but it certainly does bear a lot of eerie hallmarks to one.
How do we explain the fact that this bridge collapse, this calamity, was previewed in this Netflix film, Leave the World Behind, that was produced by Barack and Michelle Obama? I'm not imagining that. What do you think?
Well, Roger, I know your friend Patrick Bet-David has made a lot of points of that, and it's very clear that that's exactly what happens in that film as well. We talk about predictive programming, and it is a massive cyber attack which takes down global shipping, which takes down global maritime trade in that film that's predicated on sort of a disaster that leads to the end of the world. And this is all done because of cyber warfare. This is the very next thing that happens from this ship. And we know that our country and our world is exceedingly vulnerable to this. And the idea is, I know people like to think that everything takes place in space and it's all satellites anymore, but it's still 90%. I say this, not as a promotion for the U.S. Navy, but it's true. 90% of global trade still takes place on the open seas. That is why what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea, what any of these attempts to blockade the Red Sea and these sea lanes are doing, is such a monumental disaster for global trade. It's actually the first time we've ever had an on-land group conduct a naval blockade. It's very interesting. And so we need to understand how vulnerable we are. And it's very interesting that you have a movie that comes out, to much fanfare, lots of controversy, people asking these questions. Why is it that this seems so incredibly prescient that this would happen just a couple of months later, that almost the exact same scenario happened? And I suppose you can say that the only blessing is that this was the only incident that we see take place here. And that and of course in the film, there's far more casualties. There's an entire catastrophic shutdown of the U.S. electric grid. And the question that a lot of people have is when you have people like Pete Buttigieg and Secretary Mayorkas and Lloyd Austin supposedly keeping us all safe, that there's no question that people would wonder if this was something that happened on their watch.
Do you think there should be a more than departmental investigation of this? Should the Congress look at it?
Well, there's no question congressional oversight should be looking into this for any failures. And I hope to God that it was not a cyber attack. And I hope to God that this wasn't some adversary messing with the United States. But even if it wasn't, then that begs a much harder question as to what actually went wrong here. Look, if there's a problem with your power, you don't leave berthing. It's simple as that. This bridge has been up for 50 years where we haven't had a ship do something like this. So what has gone wrong in any of the training protocols or in any of the systems that are supposed to be in place to prevent such a thing from happening? And the point that I keep coming back to is, why is it that we still don't know who the pilot was? These are some basic questions that congressional oversight and others need to look into this. And the administration would rather talk about racism and racial equity and blame this on conservatives and everything under the sun, rather than actually give us a basic accounting of what went wrong here. And unfortunately, Roger, and we say this in the new book on humans, that we believe that the decline that America is currently facing is not being done by accident. We believe it is being done by agenda.
Obviously, our hearts go out to those who were killed or injured in this horrific event. But I was amused when President Joe Biden says he remembers very distinctly crossing this bridge by rail many, many times. Of course, there are no railroad tracks on this bridge. This guy lies so easily, it just rolls off his tongue. It's really quite extraordinary.
It's amazing. And Roger, like I said, my kids call this the dinosaur bridge. As you're approaching, the reason is it sort of looks like the back of a brontosaurus, stretching its neck and tail out. So my kids called it the dinosaur bridge. You drive directly over it. No, there's no train tracks. There's no train tracks whatsoever. The Amtrak bridge is on a completely separate section of the bay, a completely separate, I believe it's actually a tunnel at that point, as a matter of fact, where Amtrak goes through. What Biden is doing it's either, number one, a lie, or number two, he just legitimately can't remember because of his own mental issues, which is an issue of itself.
So, Jack, you obviously served your country in uniform, and I know you have opinions here. What is the current state of readiness of our military? I keep meeting patriots who tell me that somehow they have this dream that the military is going to save the country. I think that's misplaced. But what is the status of our military strength and capability?
Well, Roger, it's very interesting because we have a military where I would argue that, and I know people who are currently serving. I have family members and friends who are currently serving, people who are deployed all around the world. And there are patriots who are still in uniform, white hats, as you will. But at the same time, our current leadership of our military and our current readiness of our military are nowhere near where it needs to be in the face of these new global threats that we find ourselves in. And as we sit on Easter Sunday and we reflect on the sacrifice that Christ made for us to redeem our sins through his sacrifice and his return from the grave, we have to remember that these men and women are being sent out to and being asked potentially to sacrifice themselves. And what are they being asked to? I'll give you an example. This attack in which took place right on the border with Syria at this Tower 11 facility where we still have a base in Syria, in this region. It's actually right on the Jordanian side. And no question, no legal basis whatsoever to have bases in Syria. And yet we've got members of the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve in this base in harm's way with these Shia militias, Iranian-backed militias, from Georgia that are out there, and they're building things and they're constructing things on the base. What is the purpose? What is the goal? And then one of these drones, we find one of these kamikaze drones is able to come in and strike the barracks on those soldiers as they slept, Roger. This is just a couple of weeks ago. As they slept, they were able to penetrate our defenses by piggybacking on one of the American drones that was going up and coming back. They piggybacked that drone, penetrated our air defenses, got in, killed soldiers as they slept. And my question is, why, when we see this massive focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and DEI programs, and transgender and political calculations in the military and egalitarianism and social programming, my question is, how much time are you spending on that versus how much time are you spending, number one, on making sure the military is putting its mission first? The military's mission, of course, is to protect America by threatening and at times going out and hurting the enemy, and then also making sure we're doing so in a way that is protecting our own troops and our own forces. I think the military has lost its way. I think the current military leadership has lost its way. I think it needs to be changed. I think we need new leadership in there, and specifically if and when President Donald J. Trump returns to the administration, he needs to clean house at the Pentagon. And at times, I would say, Roger, there are times I feel like he should take everyone who's over the rank of colonel in the Army or Air Force or Marines, or anyone who's over the rank of captain in the Navy, and just give them their papers, and anyone who's got a general or admiral star, and just hand them their early retirement and appoint entirely new leadership to our military.
All right, folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show. We're talking to Jack Posobiec, the senior editor at Human Events. And when we come back, Jack's going to tell us about his exciting new book. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with you here in a moment.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Roger Stone Show, and we're talking to Jack Posobiec, the senior Human Events. I recently had the occasion to take Jack and his entire family, including his in-laws, for some of the greatest pizza they had ever had in their lives in South Florida. It was a great, great night. And I'm delighted to have him on the show. Jack, you have written a new book. I think it's an important new book. Tell us about it.
Roger, thank you so much. And by the way, my kids are still asking for that pizza. Of course, we're back up in the D.C. area, and so I haven't quite found one that can compete with Abitz down there in southern Florida. But even my 5-year-old Jack, we picked him up from school the other day, and he said, "Daddy, I want some Abitz." And I said, "Well, we'll have to go ask Mr. Roger to tell us where we can get some in the area." But so thank you again for that. On to the book. The title is Unhumans: The Secret History of Communist Revolutions and How to Crush Them. And the reason we did this is twofold. Number one, because our histories, Roger, of the 20th century and even sort of the events leading to the 20th century, like the French Revolution, have been completely turned upside down when it comes to the annals of who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. When people say what were the greatest atrocities of the 20th century, you very rarely hear anyone out in society today talk about the horrors of Bolshevism, the horrors of Lenin, the horrors of Stalin, of Chairman Mao, of the killing fields of Cambodia, the communist horrors of Spain, which are completely whitewashed by history. And they take the record of Francisco Franco, and they call him a reactionary, and he was the most horrible person and all of these other things. And they never talk about the fact that he was reacting to the communist atrocities. He was reacting to what the communists were doing, going into churches, killing priests, defiling nuns, people bathing in baptismal fonts and shaving themselves in these areas. The attacks on the church itself and Christianity itself, which, by the way, are not unique to Spain. We've seen revolutions like this in France, the desecration of the Notre Dame, the execution, which I talked about at Mar-a-Lago with you, the execution of the Carmelite nuns, the beheading at the guillotine at the orders of Robespierre. In Russia, the crushing, the absolute crushing of the church by the Leninists. And I would submit that what we see today, Roger, what we see today is some of the very same forces that were at play in all of these revolutions. This resentment, this anger, and deep, palpable anti-Christianity has been unleashed. And I would actually say, we wrote this in the book, and we've put the book together. It's coming out by Skyhorse. People can go get a copy. It's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Skyhorse Publishing, wherever they want to go. But if you go look at the DNC fundraiser, which was held at Radio City Music Hall on Thursday night, Holy Thursday, the former presidents of the Democrat Party, Obama, Clinton, and then Biden himself, are sitting there inside the rally, and outside you have this demonic cacophony of Hamas supporters and BLM and Antifa radicals, and every radical, every stripe of radical under the sun are out there. And Roger, what's very interesting and very clear, by the way, they're not out there calling for the head of Donald Trump or Roger Stone or Jack Posobiec. They're calling for the heads of the leaders of the Democrat Party. And what we talk about in the book is we say these forces, when they are called up, when they are used by those in power to try to destabilize their opponents, they become a sort of golem that eventually will come for you. They become a Frankenstein's monster, which eventually turns on its own master, its own creator. That's exactly what happened in all of these cases throughout the past. That's exactly what we're seeing happen now here in the United States and throughout the West. And Roger, we have to be very open-eyed and very clear-eyed. And we go through, by the way, it's actually a hopeful book, because at the end we go through, we explain the system of how this takes place. We explain what's happening now and how it's an irregular revolution. It doesn't follow the Civil War model of Spain or Russia. It's happening in sort of a 5G warfare battle space. But we also talk about what people can do. We talk about people like the great men of means. We talk about the folks at Rumble, people like Elon Musk, and, of course, people like Donald Trump can do to fight it on their own, or Michael Seifert and the folks at Public Square and what they're doing to create a parallel economy. And then we talk about what people can do on the local level, people in their churches, in their neighborhoods, in their parishes, men's groups joining together, women's groups, and mothers joining together and forming these groups to fight back, which we've already started to see a little bit at the school board level. Roger, we can actually take this country back and we can defeat these people, but but we have to understand what's going on. And unfortunately, conservatives have not yet fully woken up to what is going on.
All right, Jack, tell us the name of the book again and where folks can get it.
Of course, the book is Unhumans, The Secret History of Communist Revolutions and How to Crush Them. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Skyhorse, anywhere books are sold. And just say to you, Happy Easter, Easter blessings, and of course, Viva Cristo Rey.
All right. Thank you, Jack Posobiec, for joining us on the Roger Stone Show. I want to remind you to hang on because I'm going to reveal my Aunt Marie's famous recipe for pizzagane, sometimes called pizza rustica, pizza Chiena, but it's a savory meat pie that's traditionally eaten on Easter. Think of a homemade flaky pie crust that's filled with creamy ragout, mozzarella, pecorino romano, provolone, mortadella, salami, maybe even a little pepperoni. You want to hang on for that recipe because by the end of the show, I'm going to lay it out. I did it last Sunday. Too many complaints that I spoke too quickly and folks couldn't write it down. So get your pen and paper now. This is the Roger Stone Show and we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
We're back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio, the crown jewel of AM radio. Joining us now is Mike Davis. Mike is the former chief counsel for nominations to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, one of the greatest living Americans. He is also the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. The Article 3 Project defends constitutionalist judges and the rule of law. He's also the founder and managing partner of MRD Law, his law firm. Davis also leads the Internet Accountability Project, an advocacy organization fighting to rein in big tech, along with the Unsilenced Majority, an organization dedicated to opposing cancel culture and fighting back against the woke mob and their enablers. As chief counsel for nominations, Mike Davis advised Chairman Grassley and other senators on the confirmation of federal judges and senior executive branch appointees, serving as staff lead for 30 hearings and 41 markup hearings. He is a man of vast experience and incredible judgment. He oversaw floor votes and nominations, including the confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, as well as a record number of circuit judges confirmed during President Trump's first 2 years in office. Most importantly, Mike Davis is one of the most articulate and vocal supporters of the president and critics of the tsunami of lawfare that is aimed at our 45th and 47th president. Mike Davis, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you very much, Roger. That was a very, very warm introduction. Thank you.
Well, we're very happy to have you back on the show. You always bring us something we didn't know. I always learn something when I have you on the show. Let's start, I guess, with the upcoming Alvin Bragg trial in Manhattan, the so-called hush money trial. I just read that the judge will not allow any motions by defendant Trump's lawyers without his permission because the trial is only 2 weeks away. That doesn't seem fair to me.
Well, this whole process is not fair, Roger. As you know, this is Democrat lawfare and election interference. These Democrat prosecutors waited many months, 30 months, to bring the January 6th cases against President Trump in D.C. and in Georgia, and they waited 30 months to bring the presidential records case in Florida. And this Alvin Bragg, this Manhattan DA, this Soros-funded Manhattan DA, waited many years, well beyond the statute of limitations, to bring these bogus charges against President Trump in New York. This is the first indictment ever against a former president who happens to be a leading presidential candidate. And these Democrat prosecutors are stacking these cases back to back to back to try to interfere in the 2024 election. So they can't complain about timing for these motions, which President Trump has the absolute right, as any other criminal defendant, as any other American, to fight this criminal prosecution and file appropriate motions. He's allowed to do that. And it should be shocking to Americans that they're doing this to Trump, that they're saying that he has to get special permission from this Democrat judge to file motions to defend himself. But we've seen this as a pattern with these Democrat prosecutors, these Democrat judges, these Democrat other lawyers, these Democrat witnesses, and these Democrat hellholes like New York, D.C., and Atlanta. This is all about President Trump. They're trying to make President Trump lose on November 5th, 2024, and it's going to backfire. It's going to backfire, as the Article 3 project has been saying for the last nearly 2 years. And, after we've done 3,000 plus media hits, constant opinion pieces, constant interviews, constant social media, we've helped change the narrative. The American people understand this is lawfare, this is election interference, and the American people are not going to let these Democrat prosecutors and judges pick the next president.
What is your view regarding the gag that has been placed on the president? I thought in the valuations trial, where clearly the president paid a very heavy price just to post the bond for an appeal, which even that seems un-American to me, but he did have the benefit of being able to step out in the hall or wait until the court recess to counterpunch for the American people and tell them exactly what was going on, point out again and again that this was a case with no victim. This was a crime in search of a non-crime in search of a defendant, that Donald Trump borrowed money from banks. He put up collateral. The banks conducted their own appraisal of the value of that collateral. They made the loans. The loans were paid back. They got paid back with very handsome interest. They made some $40 million. I think the American people saw through this. So in that particular case, I think the president benefited politically. He benefited in the court of public opinion, cost him a lot of money and a lot of time, which of course is one of the goals of those who are putting him through this entire crucible. But in this case, the president is gagged, yet we seem to have a ton of new information about this case. I point out, among other things, that the Southern District of New York considered this case, looked at all the evidence of this case, and elected, I think, based on the lack of credibility of the government's chief witness, Michael Cohen, not to bring the case. Then we learned that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of evidence and records pertaining to that review, which is only just now being handed over to President Trump's lawyers. And it seems to me that potentially motions could grow out of that new information, but the judge won't allow any motions. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, I've not. Remember what this case is all about. At best, this is a charge. They're charging Trump for settling a nuisance claim. A businessman settles nuisance claims all the time, and what they're alleging is that Trump violated some misdemeanor bookkeeping statute. The statute of limitations has long ago passed. So even if Trump violated this bookkeeping misdemeanor, which he didn't, but let's just pretend that he did, the statute of limitations has passed. And so what they've done is they've taken these New York bookkeeping misdemeanors and bootstrapped on federal election law violations somehow. And then they're transforming these misdemeanors where the statute of limitations has long passed and turning them into these new made-up felonies, right? And this bogus legal theory was passed over by the prior Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, the Federal Election Commission, Alvin Bragg himself, And it wasn't until Matthew Colangelo got sent from the Biden Justice Department. He was the one of the top political appointees in the Biden Justice Department. He was in the number 3 office in the Biden Justice Department, the Associate Attorney General's office. He got deployed from the Biden Justice Department to the Soros-funded Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's office to resurrect the zombie case against Trump, and they brought this first indictment ever. And then they moved forward and put this illegal, unconstitutional gag order on President Trump, where he's not allowed to talk about Matthew Colangelo. He's not allowed to talk about these witnesses, right? And so if there's anyone on the planet who must have the constitutional right to speak out against the judge, the court staff, the prosecutor, the prosecutor's team, the witnesses, and the process, it is a criminal defendant going through that process. The only place on the planet where you can't have criminal defendants exercise their constitutional rights to speak out are in places like North Korea, China, Zimbabwe, and now D.C., New York, and Atlanta. And remember, Roger, your listeners need to remember this. They started this unprecedented, illegal, unconstitutional gag order game on your trial when Judge Amy Berman Jackson, this hyper-partisan D.C. Democrat judge, illegally, unconstitutionally gagged you when you went through your process. And this is the problem, right? People think that this is going to go away when Trump goes away and his top friends and allies like Roger Stone go away. It's not. Trump and his allies are in the way, right? Remember, they're not just going after Trump and his good friends like Roger Stone and top advisors like Roger Stone and Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon and Trump's lawyers and his January 6th supporters. These Democrats, these are Marxists. They're going after parents outraged by gender chaos in schools and the resulting rapes in high school bathrooms. They're going after Christians praying outside of abortion clinics while they give amnesty to Biden, his sleazebag family, his corrupt sleazebag family, Antifa, Hamas, BLM, the abortion industry activists, the trans terrorists who are burning down Catholic churches and crisis pregnancy centers. This is the point. This lawfare must end. It's not going to, because if Trump is not back in the White House and ending this lawfare, our country is doomed. These are republic-ending tactics.
You raise a very good case. In my case, it was I was not only gagged before the trial, I was also gagged during the trial. I was also gagged after the trial. I was gagged right up until the moment I was supposed to be turned over to a federal prison. My lawyers can't find any other record of that having been done in American history. The judge also gagged the members of my family. How do you take someone who's not charged with a crime and take away their First Amendment rights? My wife, my daughter, my son, they weren't allowed to speak. She went so far as to say that my quote-unquote supporters were gagged. I guess she was referring to Tucker Carlson because his commentary on my trial drove her somewhat crazy. But no, it was definitely a test case, and it was horrific. It appears, now we know that Judge Merchan, the judge in the upcoming Alvin Bragg hush money trial, gave a $15 contribution to Joe Biden's campaign for president in violation of the judicial canon of ethics in New York. And on that basis, I think he should recuse himself alone. That it was only $15 doesn't matter. 15, 50, 500, it doesn't matter. He gave a political contribution to Donald Trump's opponent in this election. But he refuses to recuse himself. More recently, the investigative journalist Laura Loomer, based on everything I have seen, appears to have absolute evidence that the judge's daughter, a woman named Lauren Merchan, who just happens to work as a Democratic political consultant and whose clients include the Biden-Harris campaign, had been posting on social media, specifically on X, formerly known as Twitter, attacking President Donald Trump, putting up a graphic of Trump behind bars. This, to me, if that all checks out, because the media is in overdrive trying to discredit that claim by Loomer, which to me just means it's almost overwhelmingly probably true. Would that not be another reason why the judge should recuse himself?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This judge should recuse himself. He donated to the political campaign of Biden against Donald Trump. His daughter, if she's a consultant for Biden's campaign or Harris's campaign, she has a financial stake in this election. That definitely, at a minimum, creates the appearance of bias for Judge Merchan. And so under the appearance of bias, he should absolutely recuse, right? And these Democrats are saying that Trump is somehow threatening these judges when he points out this obvious political bias and at least the appearance of conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of conflict of interest. That is insane. If a criminal defendant can't point out a process that has been politicized and weaponized against him, we're going to lose our country. Remember, these are the same Democrats, Joe Biden's White House, Joe Biden's Justice Department, who encouraged illegal obstruction of justice campaigns outside of the homes of Supreme Court justices and their families while they were deciding a pending case. This led to Supreme Court justices, this intimidation campaign, obstruction and intimidation campaign by the Democrats, Biden Democrats, led to Supreme Court justices and their families being sent to safe houses. Even after the 1 a.m. assassination attempt against Justice Kavanaugh, his wife Ashley, and their 2 teenage daughters, the Biden White House and the Biden Justice Department still allowed these illegal obstruction of justice campaigns. They said that these were somehow protected by the First Amendment. That is absolutely wrong. You do not have a First Amendment right to protest outside of anyone's house. They can't leave their house, and there are time, place, and manner restrictions on the First Amendment. You certainly can't protest outside of a judge's house, particularly when they're deciding a case. That is obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. 1507. And so I don't want to hear these Democrats complaining that Trump is pointing out the bias of these judges and prosecutors and staff and witnesses and adult family members after these Democrats ran these illegal obstruction of justice campaigns, even after someone tried to kill Kavanaugh and his family.
Yeah, there's constant complaints by the prosecutors and others about death threats against them. I'd be happy to show you the ones that I've gotten, thousands and thousands and thousands of them since 2016. I'm skeptical, in all honesty. On the other hand, they have federal marshals to protect them. My family and I had no one to protect us. Big, big difference. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show. I'm talking to Mike Davis, who is former chief counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee and also the head of the Article 3 project. And we're talking about the tsunami of lawfare against President Donald Trump. Specifically, we've been focusing on this upcoming April 15th trial right here in Manhattan, where District Attorney Alvin Bragg is prosecuting Donald Trump in what, at best, if they really have a case, should be a business records civil case, but they've made a criminal case out of it. And we'll be right back with Mike Davis.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. We're here with Mike Davis, former chief counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee and currently the founder and president of the Article 3 project. And we've been talking about the upcoming trial in Manhattan, where District Attorney Alvin Bragg is taking Donald Trump to trial. This is really quite extraordinary. The government's chief witness is Michael Cohen, a former lawyer for the Trump Organization. I know Michael Cohen. He testified before both the House and the Senate, claiming that he had overheard a phone conversation between me and Donald Trump, candidate Trump, because Trump put this phone conversation on speakerphone, in which I told the president, allegedly, that WikiLeaks had and would publish information on the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton that would be damaging to her campaign. First, Mr. Cohen testified that this happened in July of 2016. Then he testified that it happened in August of 2016, changing his story. I can tell you exactly when it happened, Mike. It happened never. There's no phone record to bolster this claim. The assistant to Trump, who Cohen said came into the room and said, Mr. Trump, Roger Stone is on line one. She denies that ever happened as well. That's because, well, it never happened. That's why Michael Cohen was not a witness in my trial. I think they realize that he changes his story constantly. And in this case, Cohen has said, both under oath and in letters and in writing, and I believe in previous testimony, that he did not pay off Stormy Daniels on behalf of Donald Trump. Stormy Daniels herself, the adult movie actress, says this never happened. These people have changed their story so many times. It's amazing. And then yesterday, Michael Avenatti, not one of my heroes, currently incarcerated for unrelated crimes where he stole from a number of his clients, he came forward and said the person who was having an affair with Stormy Daniels was not Donald Trump, but Michael Cohen himself. And that basically Cohen made these payments to silence her so that Cohen's wife would not learn. And then he attempted to use blackmail against the Trump organization to cover up what had transpired. Now, I admit Avenatti's not the most credible witness, but what do you think of that claim, Mike?
Well, I mean, I think that Michael Cohen is going to have a lot of credibility problems with any jury because he's pled guilty to 8 counts of including fraud, and so I just it's going to be a New York City jury, a Manhattan jury, so they're obviously going to hate Trump, and they're probably going to ignore all the evidence that's exculpatory for Trump and find Trump guilty, and this judge is going to convict him. But this is a mess of a case. Remember, the Democrats have 4 criminal indictments against Trump. This is by far their weakest and dumbest case. And the only reason that this case is going first is because the other cases are tied up with presidential immunity and on the January 6th cases in D.C. and down in Georgia, and then the classified documents case is dealing with a lot of pretrial issues, including presidential immunity and many other issues. And so this is the case that's going to go to trial on April 15th. And if you think about this, this is their worst case. It's like during the Kavanaugh confirmation that I served as the staff leader, as the chief counsel for nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I remember these Democrats brought 6 bogus allegations against Kavanaugh, that essentially he was a serial gang rapist going back to his teenage years, despite the fact that we did 7 full-field FBI investigations and separate Senate investigations, and they talked to everyone who knew Kavanaugh going back to his childhood, and there was no whiff of this. But somehow Kavanaugh ran this secret serial gang rape ring. And remember what the Democrats did. They're doing the same play here. They piled on with way too many allegations. They couldn't just stick to Christine Blasey Ford, who was lying through her teeth, but she was the most credible. They couldn't just stick to the Mar-a-Lago case, which I can defend all day under the Presidential Records Act, but that's the Democrats' strongest case here. They had to bring in all these other allegations in the Kavanaugh matter. They had to bring in all these other cases against Trump for this election interference and lawfare, and that the American people are waking up and seeing that this is silly. And what you're going to do with this case in New York is it's going to be a clown show. It's going to be the Star Wars bar up there with all these crazy witnesses, Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, maybe Avenatti pops his head up from prison, who knows. But it's going to be a circus in New York, and the American people are going to look at that case. They're going to tune in. Many people are busy and have not been paying attention to this lawfare and election interference like we have. And when the American people tune in on April 15th and they see this clown show in New York, it's going to undermine the Democrats' lawfare and all these other cases, just like Michael Avenatti did in the Kavanaugh case when he brought his bogus allegations by Julie Swetnick against Kavanaugh, and that undermines all the other allegations that the Democrats brought against Kavanaugh with the 5 other bogus accusers.
All right. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Mike Davis, the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, thank you so much for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.
Thank you, Roger.
All right, folks, here it is. We promised it to you through the entire show this Easter. This is Pizzagane. It's the famous Italian Easter pie. This is a much anticipated savory treat in the Stone household. It's really quite an undertaking to prepare, but I've simplified my Aunt Marie's recipe. This is a deep dish pie it's a real family tradition. Here's what you're going to need. First of all, you need 4 unbaked 9-inch pie crusts. You divide those. You need 2 16-ounce containers of whole milk ricotta cheese, what we call ragat. You need 1 cup of shredded mozzarella. You need 2 large eggs. You need about a half pound of sweet gabagool. You need a half pound of hot gabagool, or maybe a quarter pound of pepperoni, or a quarter pound of mortadella, or a quarter pound of salami. That's all up to you. And of course, you need 1 large egg, which you're going to slightly beat. Now, preheat the oven to 375 degrees. Press 1 pie crust into the bottom of each of 2 9-inch pie dishes. Set those aside. Now, mix together the ragat, the mozzarella cheese, and the eggs in a large bowl until they are well combined. Now you chop up your gabagool, or your pepperoni, or your mortadella, or your salami. That's really up to you. And you divide them evenly between the prepared pie dishes. Now top each of the remaining pie crusts, crimping the edges together to seal them, and brush the top of each with beaten egg white. You have now only to bake in your preheated oven until the crust is golden brown, usually about 45 to 60 minutes. And this is all important. Let it sit and cool for at least 10 minutes before you cut into them. This is kind of like Italian quiche, but much, much better. My mother and my Aunt Marie's famous recipe for pizzagane. This Easter, please enjoy.